I'm Sathnam Sanghera, a writer and journalist. For the first time in my life, I'm about to fire a rifle.
Remarkably easy.
Guns just like this were fired by British Empire troops in a public park in Amritsar, India, on the 13th of April, 1919. Hundreds of people were killed.
जहाँ लाशें, औरतें, बच्चे, छोटे-छोटे बच्चे.
The Amritsar massacre was the moment Britain lost the largest empire in history. 100 years later, I'll meet descendants of the colonial officials involved.
The empire, I think, is very controversial to a lot of people. However, they did do a lot of good.
I'll go to Amritsar, where the massacre doesn't feel like history, but a live issue.
The regime at that time was completely racist.
Britain is about to leap into an unknown future. So it seems appropriate, as we redefine our place in the world, to look back at a time when we ruled a quarter of it.
I could have taught myself about all these things, and I haven't. And why is that? And is it partly because my very British grammar school, university education has slightly colonized my mind and made me averse to going into these areas?
The film Gandhi is about the downfall of the British Empire in India. I first saw it as a young British Sikh and was struck by this portrayal of a massacre in the Sikh holy city of Amritsar.
This particular scene is the moral heart of the film. It's the source of all the moral outrage in the entire film, really. I remember being really affected by it, but then not really going on to research it in any way, you know? I didn't make the connection between it being in the Sikh holy city and my story. It's odd. I definitely heard of the Amritsar massacre, but at no point during formal education was I taught anything about empire. And now empire is in the air, you know? It regularly makes headlines. What people think about Churchill, what people think about colonialism, slavery. Personally, I just don't know how to answer those questions. I find myself confused. And there's no more symbolic event than the Amritsar massacre within empire. We need to understand this event to understand empire and also to understand modern Britain. I think it's about history and memory, and it's also about now.
Before I head off for India, I want to look into how this story is viewed at home. Britain's official report from the time cites 379 killed, but our government has never formally apologised. It still follows the line set a century ago by Winston Churchill. He claimed the massacre wasn't typical of how Britain ruled its empire, that it was the fault of one officer, the man who gave the order to open fire. General Reginald Dyer, who'd spent nearly all his adult life in the Indian Army, was relieved of his command. But Dyer is not an obvious imperial bad guy. He was born in India and spoke fluent Hindi and Urdu. So I'm about to meet his great-granddaughter, Caroline.
You know, if you, like, say, have a relative who's done a really, really bad thing, do you still have pictures up in the family? I mean, my uncle killed another one of my uncles, you know, in the Punjab. And we've still got pictures up of him. You know, he's still my uncle. So on that level, I understand that family remains family. I'm intrigued to know where Caroline stands. Nice to meet you, Caroline.
Lovely to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Great, come along in. And I'm here to say, yes, I am proud to be General Dyer's great-granddaughter. There are a lot of people who are very proud to be called Dyer.
And what were you told he was like as a man?
He was an extremely honest, obedient soldier.
Opinion was divided, wasn't it? Even Winston Churchill
Oh, he was
described...
so slimy, for goodness sake. General Dyer was made a scapegoat for him.
Caroline is eager to show me that not everyone shared Churchill's point of view.
These actually were in my loo in London,
All right.
Except for this, which I think is wonderful.
So these were, I'm guessing, British
And
people
Indian.
in India
Yes.
who supported his actions. Looking at the names, it's mainly British people.
Yes, I think mainly British. Quite a lot of Violets.
Yes.
Violet someone.
Not many
It's a very
sings.
popular name.
I think you'd agree that at least 370 people died. And
The whole thing was-
including some children, including some babies.
Well, that's what you think.
Well, I'm just going, it's not what I think, it's just what I've read in various books.
Right, so,
Which book? Okay, even discount the babies.
Doesn't that fill you with remorse?
And General Dyer was devastated. It had to be done. They were being charged at by 25,000 people. How do you stop people? What do you do? Say, do stop? Of course you don't.
Would you agree that it might have been a symptom of his age, but he didn't see Indians as equals?
I'm afraid he's not here to answer that one. I've no idea, but I know he had a lot of friends who were Indians, and he highly respected them. We all adore the Indians, and I'm so delighted to meet you.
Well, I see. Well, I think I'm probably more British than Indian, but I am Indian.
I hope that you will account in your mind both sides. It's quite important that you do, because the time was different to what it is now.
Well, thank you for your time, Caroline. I really appreciate it.
It's lovely to have met you. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I just need a moment to decompress.
Someone who strongly defended General Dyer's actions 100 years ago was the Assistant Commissioner in Amritsar, Ronald Beckett.
Hi, William.
Hello.
Sathnam. Nice to
Hello.
meet you.
Nice to meet you.
His grandchildren, William and Sabrina, have agreed to talk to me.
Hello. Hi, I'm Sathnam.
Hi.
Hi. So that's Ronald Beckett.
Yeah.
I thought it might actually be you, you know.
William and Sabrina tell me the story of the massacre, as it's been handed down in their family.
I think you should avoid the word massacre because it wasn't.
I know people disagree with that. So how do you refer to it?
Riot. Of course, you have great sympathy for the people who died, but then why were they there? I don't feel sympathy for the people who went to make violent demonstrations. And if you had been there, you would have been up there with Dyer cheering, almost undoubtedly. They were all...
I think there's probably a fair chance I would have been on my way to the Golden Temple for Massacre and might have got caught up and been shot dead.
No, you wouldn't have been caught up. That's the myth, that it wasn't a being caught up thing.
You went there deliberately.
Do you feel that British Empire is given a bad rep?
Yes, I do. I mean, of course, there were some awful things happened, but awful things happened without the British. I'm interested that you are in the process of making such a film because it seems quite brave. The force of propaganda is against you.
My conversations with the descendants of colonials have given me a lot to think about. I've been told the death toll has been exaggerated and that children were not killed. That General Dyer acted in self-defense. In fact, we shouldn't use the term massacre at all, but call it a riot. I want to look into these claims. With that in mind, I'm off to India.
The last time I went there, I got really sick. I got a brain parasite and nearly died. Hence all my hand sanitizers. Sometimes people don't wash their hands after they cook the food, that's the thing. Anyway, I'm going to try not to be a hypochondriac. I'm not even telling my mum I'm going, actually, because she'll just worry. I've told her I'm going to Las Vegas.
Amritsar, in northern India, is now an important city in an emerging superpower. For Sikhs, it's also the site of our most important place of worship, the Golden Temple.
There's so many turbans, man. Sikhs are such a tiny community in Britain, and actually they're a tiny community in modern India. But here, they're everywhere. The pilot was a Sikh. So it slightly, it feels really exciting, but it slightly freaks me out as well. God, this is proper old India, isn't it?
I have a personal connection to this extraordinary city. My parents came to Britain from villages just outside Amritsar in the rural Punjab.
I never used to look forward going to the Punjab because it was chaotic and noisy and there was no Nintendos there. But now, it's different coming here as an adult. You can really sense the history, and the thing that I'm most struck by is that actually, if my parents had stayed here, this is where the kind of place I would have grown up. So these are my people, I guess.
In 1919, the Punjab was a critical part of the British Empire, producing as much as a third of India's wheat and supplying 60% of the British Army's Indian soldiers. But the Punjab census of the time described the people of Amritsar as low status, living in narrow lanes. I want to visit the actual site where the killing was done 100 years ago. Near the Golden Temple, I walk down the same alleyway that Dyer came along with his riflemen. It opens onto an enclosed park, the Jallianwala Bagh.
Gosh, this is not how I imagined it.
The Bagh is green and pleasant. There's some topiary commemorating the massacre, and white squares mark where the bullets from 1919 have scarred brick walls. But all this is mostly ignored by happy families.
In a way, it feels quite apt that people use this park for life. You know, it's quite a positive way of using a tragic site, rather than it being a place of mourning.
On the 13th of April 1919, about 20,000 were in the Bagh, where there was an illegal protest against the British regime. Just after 5 p.m, General Dyer entered with 50 riflemen.
So they were lined up there and they opened fire, and there was nowhere to hide.
Historian Kim Wagner is Danish, lives in London, and is often in Amritsar, digging up the past. He probably knows more about the massacre than anyone alive.
Some of the British officers who were there described there were people within 8 or 10 yards when Dyer and the troops first entered. So it was basically point-blank range.
And there's been so much controversy about the number of people who have been killed. You've looked at the numbers very hard and closely. What's your conclusion?
We will never know for sure exactly how many people were killed. The British, they settled on the number of 379, which were firmly confirmed. That was almost certainly an underestimate. And I would estimate something like 500-600 people were killed, and perhaps 3 times that were wounded.
Kim has also found evidence that not all those shot were protesting. He's given me testimonies made to the Indian National Congress shortly after the massacre. Some are from people who were just enjoying a day out in the park with their family.
The details of it are incredible. This is one bit where he says some people had their heads cut open, others had eyes shot out, and nose, chest, arms, or legs shattered.
And you can't help but be really moved by the children caught up in the crowd. And there's one witness who says, close by to where I was lying, there was a young boy, aged about 12 years old, lying dead with a child of 3 years old in his arms, also dead. I'm shocked to discover that among the confirmed dead were 15 children. One of them just 6 months old. The death toll has not been exaggerated. If anything, it was worse than I thought. I'm determined to find out why they were killed. I'm in Amritsar, where I've been told as many as 500 Indians were killed by British Empire troops 100 years ago. It was a turning point in the history of our empire, and in Amritsar, it feels like a wound that still hasn't healed. I think every Sikh temple in the world is exactly the same, but I haven't told my mum I'm in India, so when she finds out, I think the one mitigating factor is if I tell her I've been in a Sikh temple, and she might feel a bit better about it. One explanation of the Amritsar massacre is that it was self-defense. The argument goes that the riflemen opened fire to protect themselves because the Indians had lethal weapons called lathis. I reckon a way to look into this argument is to get myself a lathi. Uncle Ji, main lathi leta honi hai. Ite hai kya shop? So I'm asking where I can find one. The trouble is, my Punjabi is so poor that this man thinks I'm after a lassi, a kind of Indian yogurt drink. I get there in the end, and this, I'm told, is the place for lathis. Mara kamli bhi use kar sakte jita
मारने के लिए भी हाँ कोई ऐसी बात नहीं इसी काम के लिए ही है.
So sometimes they were used as weapons, but generally they were used for farm work.
हाथ में रखते हैं ऐसे पकड़ के जैसे कोई सांप आगे कोई किसी
Oh, for snakes. They cost 250 rupees and I did no haggling, which is going to shame my mother. I think I should go back and get them for less, otherwise she's going to beat me up with the lathi. These are pretty much handsome ceremonial sticks and very much not weapons, in my opinion. For me, it's obvious. Lathis are no match for rifles. So justifying the massacre on the basis of self-defense doesn't stand up. But I still want to look into the claim that it wasn't a massacre, it was a riot. I'm Manish. So I'm meeting Manish Khanna. Sasrika.
Manish Khanna.
Manish Khanna.
Please.
Nice to meet you. Manish's grandfather, Lala, believed British rule was unjust. So on the 13th of April 1919, he went to the Jallianwala Bagh to protest. According to Manish, Lala was shot 6 times.
First, second, third, fourth, and fifth, sixth.
Did your grandfather go there to have a fight?
No.
Just protest?
No, just protest. और उन्हां नू वार्निंग भी नहीं दिती और शूट दा ऑर्डर हो गया एकदम और लोग भजने शुरू हो गए अपनी जान नेचुरली गल है लोग अपनी जान बचाएंगे लाला जी वो दीवार दे उत्ते उन्हां नू गोलियां लगियां सतनाम वहाँ दरवाजों के पास आपने गोलियों के निशान देखे होंगे वो वही गोलियां हैं जो लोगों को लाशें गिरी हैं वहाँ दरवाजों जो ऊपर चढ़ रहे थे वो नीचे गिरा रहे थे उनको टारगेट करके वो जो दरवाजा फांद रहे थे उनको टारगेट करके और वो नीचे गिराया जा रहा है ताकि भागने नहीं देना मारना है इनको बस
ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਕੀ ਫੀਲਿੰਗ ਹੈ ਉਦੋਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ ਜਲਿਆਂਵਾਲਾ ਬਾਗ ਨੂੰ ਅੱਜ तेरी फीलिंग
मैं रोता हूँ सतनाम मेरी आंखों में आंसू आते हैं वो सीन क्रिएट होता है अभी लास्ट 15 डेज पहले अमृतसर में हम लोग थे बच्चों के साथ जहाँ लाशें औरतें, बच्चे, छोटे-छोटे बच्चे।
Manishi's story is very moving, and it was confirmed by General Dyer in his testimony to the Hunter Committee, which was the official British inquest made shortly after the killings. Dyer described what he saw in the Jallianwala Bagh as a meeting that he opened fire within 30 seconds, which in my mind gave him no time to distinguish between protesters and bystanders. Other witnesses confirmed he directed fire towards people trying to escape. For me, there's no room for doubt. It was a massacre.
It's late and I'm in my hotel room and I can't sleep because of a combination, I think, of jet lag and anger about what I learned today.
I'm also left with this kind of curious, confusing sense that maybe, I'm partly to blame for my lack of education. I could have taught myself about all these things and I haven't. And why is that? And is it partly because my very British grammar school, university education has slightly colonized my mind and made me averse to going into these areas? Certainly, I think my Indian immigrant background has instilled in me this sense of inferiority or this tendency to look down on India. India, when I was growing up, was always something my relatives wanted to leave for England, and I saw coming here as a kind of punishment. I wonder whether I've slightly internalized that, and that's why I've, gone along with a conventional British amnesia on empire. But I'm glad that finally, at the age of 42, I'm getting educated, and I just hope I have the courage to keep on looking the history in its eye, even if it means more lost sleep.
What's bugging me is, if there was no riot, then why did Dyer react as he did? So I'm meeting historian Kim Wagner.
Wow.
Kim says he's cracked this mystery and has something he wants to show me. Right in the heart of Amritsar city is a Christian cemetery.
So we have here Sergeant T.A. Rowlands of the Rifle Brigade, who died on the 10th of April 1919, aged just 23.
He was beaten to death on Rigo Bridge near the train station. And the same for Robinson, who was a guard on the railway.
There are 5 graves of Brits killed in riots on the 10th of April 1919, 3 days before the massacre. India in early 1919 was in turmoil. I wasn't taught this at school, but over 100,000 Indians had been killed or wounded fighting for Britain in the First World War. India also endured heavy taxation to help fund Britain's war effort. Instead of thanks and reward, Indians faced further restrictions on speech, writing and movement. Across the subcontinent, there were non-violent protests for reform. On the 10th of April 1919, in Amritsar, the British misunderstood what was going on and panicked. When 20 demonstrators were shot, a peaceful protest turned into a lethally violent riot.
In memory of Gilbert M. Thompson, murdered during the riots on the 10th of April 1919, aged 33 years. And that's really young, isn't it? Gosh. The Europeans, some Europeans did die really horrible deaths.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that gets forgotten in the story of the Amritsar massacre, I guess.
It was the main story from the British perspective for a very long time. That was, in a sense, the only story.
The chaotic ferocity that led to these 5 deaths terrified Amritsar's colonial elite. Kim takes me to the bank where Thompson was killed.
The bank manager, Thompson, he's on the top of the roof, and so people, they break into the bank and make their way upstairs. He shoots one of the attackers, but is then overpowered and is thrown out over the balcony down on the road. Broken furniture and papers pile on top of him, and he's set on fire.
General Dyer arrived in Amritsar the day after Thompson was burnt alive. The Brits were frightened. As they later testified to the Hunter Committee, they thought they were facing another mutiny, known in India as the First War of Independence. In the 1857 mutiny, Indians killed hundreds of Europeans, men, women, and children. And for a while, Britain lost control of much of the subcontinent. This is what the Brits were fearing most.
Absolutely. It replicates very closely the sort of nightmare scenario of 1857 of isolated Europeans being surrounded by angry Indian mobs.
And this is also the downside of the empire. Famously, British Empire was run by very few Brits, ruling over millions of Indians.
And you see when the British control collapses, as it does in 1857, as it does momentarily in 1919, everything comes apart, and you have these extremely violent situations.
Dyer and his 50 riflemen enter the Jallianwala Bagh 3 days after the riots. He told the government inquest he opened fire on the Indian crowd to give them a lesson. I was going to punish them. The point of which was, he said, to prevent anybody who thought they could manage to mutiny from mutinying. And, as I'm about to discover, Dyer's punishment of Indians was far from over. Amritsar's former town hall was built by the Brits in proud imperial style. But I've now discovered what lay behind the pride here. Violence and death. But was the massacre an aberration in an otherwise fair and just empire? Or was this kind of violence built into the Raj in a way we've all managed to forget? In search of an answer, I'm heading into the narrow lanes of the old city. To a street called Koryadiku. Uncle Ji, Sat Sri Akal Ji, Koryadiku, next left. Thank you. Uncle Ji, Koryadiku lag gaya tha? Oh, there. Thank you. Trouble is, there are no street signs in the old city. Uncle Ji, na kiya hai street da? Alright, ku hega te? I find Koryadiku, which reminds me of the India my parents told me about. In late April 1919, a week after the massacre, the British blocked off this street. A sergeant in the army unit manning the checkpoint took pictures of it. He even photographed locals being forced to crawl along the street. A collective punishment because a British woman had been attacked here. I've arranged to meet an Indian writer who knows all about the crawling order, Kishwar Desai. I mean, when I heard about this punishment, I had this idea, when I was thinking about this program, I was thinking, you know what, I should crawl down the street to see what it was like for an Indian person to crawl down 100 years ago. But even walking down it with my white trainers is something I think twice about. But 100 years ago, it would have been muddy.
Not only muddy, it was filthy.
And also, people were crawling at the end of a bayonet.
It was just awful. It was awful because these men were respectable people and they were being made to crawl in the shit and dirt for no fault of theirs.
What would you say to British people listening to you now who still believe that the British Empire was good and fair and just?
Well, Like you said, I'd like them to come down here and try crawling down the street, and I think they will get their answer. We don't have to say very much more after that.
The crawling order was part of a systematic clampdown by the British authorities after the massacre. Indians had to salute every white person whose path they crossed. If not, they were in danger of arrest and torture. Even public flogging. The British gave this brutal regime the whimsical term, fancy punishments.
And these fancy punishments was a way for army officers to send out their own forms of messages to the people of Punjab that they were not equal to the British.
Is it just like an appendix to the story, or does it say something fundamental about what happened?
Oh, totally. I mean, it says something as fundamental as that the regime at that time was completely racist and also extremely cruel in their attitude towards the Indians, because this depended completely on the color of your skin. This punishment did not apply to European men walking down the street. This applied only to Indians.
On a doorstep in the crawling lane, I read testimony from Indians punished here. They asked me to lie on my belly. Because they threatened me, I did so. When I was going to rise, they struck me with the butt end of their rifles. I crawled along. All the while, the British soldiers kept laughing at me.
It's hard to read this and not feel physically sick. And actually, it's making me think that I've been too wary about calling empire racist in the past, when it clearly, at this time at least, was an exercise in racial humiliation. And if I was here, if my family were living around here, they were at a serious risk of being flogged, tortured, arrested, humiliated in this way, just because of the colour of their skin. And I feel slightly embarrassed that I've been so, cautious about saying that.
The fancy punishments in Amritsar in 1919 were orchestrated by General Dyer, the officer who gave the order to open fire that led to the massacre. Dyer's base in Amritsar was the exclusive whites-only European club, where, on the tennis courts, he had a flogging post put up.
Almost a stereotypical idea of empire that a Brit would play tennis in the morning and then whip a native half to death in the afternoon. That's the way you kind of satirize empire, but it actually happened here.
I'm here seeking an answer to a controversy that began right after the massacre. According to Winston Churchill, what Dyer did in Amritsar wasn't typical of how Britain ruled India. I put this to historian Kim Wagner.
When I began this investigation, I was aware of the famous Winston Churchill quote, which described the events as a monstrous event. But the quote goes on, and he also describes it as a singular event. Do you agree with that?
No. I mean, and Churchill, of all people, knew better. What he's actually trying to do is rehabilitate the empire and, in a sense, throw Dyer under the bus. So it becomes this rotten apple narrative. The entire imperial project, the Raj, was predicated on notions of racialized difference. Nothing that Dyer says in 1919, nothing that Dyer does in 1919 hasn't already been done before. This was actually part and parcel of British rule in India and the result of this sort of structural racism and pervasive violence, which is indisputable.
Kim's argument that violence and racism were built into the Raj fits with what I've discovered. I now view the massacre in the context of the crawling order and public floggings, all the so-called fancy punishments. And I realised that the people who were killed at Jallianwala Bagh died because of their skin colour. think the idea of British exceptionalism runs deep in our culture. You know, we were the good guys in World War I, World War II. And then what I've learned today is that we weren't always the good guys. What happened in the crawling lane was an act not only of racism, but of racial humiliation and white supremacy. You know, it was morally obscene. And there's nothing wrong with saying that. In Amritsar, I've come to see the massacre as more than a key moment in the history of empire. It's become the prism through which I view the whole Raj, and it still affects the relationship between Britain and India today. Thanks to Brexit, Britain is reconsidering its place in the world. So I'm going to talk about the empire and its legacy with historian Anchal Malhotra while eating some delicious food and drinking the best lassi in town.
Hey.
Hey.
Hello. How's your day been?
It's been good.
Oh, wow. You know what? I don't think I've ever had a lassi before.
What?
We never had lassi at home, and I've never...
एक straw भी दे देंगे?
It's never looked like appetizing.
Oh, really?
This is yogurt, right?
Yeah.
This is where I become a proper Indian. You now think I'm pathetic, right?
Not at all.
Because I've never had a lassi.
Not at all.
Wow. That tastes amazing.
Are you just saying that?
No, generally it does taste amazing. I thought it'd be...
Anchal is an oral historian. She collects the memories of ordinary Indians, in particular about life in the British Empire.
In general, is British Empire seen as a terrible, terrible thing here? Or is it seen in a more nuanced light?
There are versions to every story. And I think the perception will change depending on who you ask and what their family's experience has been.
Are there people who think there were good things about empire?
We're speaking in the English language.
Of course, the
You know,
English
I mean,
language.
That's the one thing that brings the nation of India together. I mean, if it weren't for English, then the North wouldn't be able to talk to the South. So I feel like that's a thing.
Are there any other positives?
Of the Raj?
Yeah. Struggling. What about democracy? Apart from
about democracy?
Apart from the 300-400 years where the British allowed no democracy, some people might say we left you with some democracy.
Those are your words, not mine.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's quite controversial to say
Yes.
the British left in India to say the British gave us this. You gave yourself most things yourself, right?
I think we fought for a lot of things ourselves, and I think that we took it because it's our right. You know, it's anyone's basic human right to want to be free and live on your own terms, and I think that's what we did.
With my journey approaching its end, Anchal has given me lots to think about, and I head back to my hotel, considering the long and complicated relationship between Britain and India. So it's my last day in Amritsar, and because it's my last day, when my mom just rang, I told her I was in India, and I didn't get the wall of anxiety and worry that I was expecting. And I had relatives texting me within minutes telling me to bring stuff back for them. But I leave thinking that we've never really confronted what happened. Hundreds of years of pain. We don't want to believe we come from such pain. It's quite difficult to face up to what happened in history. But if we want to have, a really healthy relationship in the future with this superpower, it would be useful for us to sort out what happened and come to some kind of reconciliation. Just before I pack up and go home, I begin my contribution to the reconciliation process. It doesn't feel however, that my journey is at an end. I'm writing an email to Caroline Dyer, the great-granddaughter of General Dyer, who was in command of the troops that did the killing.
The empire, I think, is very controversial to a lot of people. However, they did do a lot of good.
The email is also going to Raj Kohli.
Raj, it's nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you. Welcome.
I met Raj at his family home in Rugby before I flew out to Amritsar. His great-uncle survived the massacre by hiding under a pile of dead bodies.
How could anyone even feel that, you know, that ordering that firing, that they would ever be able to justify that?
So I had this idea of perhaps getting Caroline Dyer together with Raj Kohli, get them in a room together, and maybe get them to agree on some common ground. And I thought I'd invite them to a meeting. That's it. Both Caroline and Raj say yes. 2 weeks later, I'm in a London office, waiting for them.
I wish I hadn't had this idea. It feels like my finals. It feels like I'm trying to single-handedly create a Truth and Reconciliation Committee for the British Empire. And maybe I'm trying to be too ambitious. But I need to give it a shot. Now they're coming. Caroline, hi.
Hello, how lovely to see you.
Welcome to this completely atmosphereless room.
It really is. But lovely. You will bring the atmosphere in anyway, so don't worry.
This is Raj Kohli,
Oh,
Dr.
great.
Raj Kohli.
Hello, Raj.
Good morning.
How
Caroline.
lovely to meet you.
Really lovely to meet you.
Thank you, I hope so. General Dyer was a very honourable man and greatly liked by the Indian, who spoke 3 or 4 Indian languages, which very few people did.
I think we may be brushing over his contempt for Indians when we talk about the fact that he knew 4 languages, and certainly your recollection or understanding of how he was received by Indians would certainly be at odds with what we understand and what is written about him.
So your great-uncle, Balwant,
Yes.
what was his experience?
He's a young man. He described himself as a bit of a hellraiser.
So he was a looter. Was he a looter?
No, I wouldn't say he was a looter. He was an educated man, and certainly far from it. And I don't think the family would have certainly allowed that kind of behaviour. I would object quite strongly to the view that they were rioters.
I do respect hugely the people and the families who got killed and everything. But so does General Dyer.
And I'm also very aware what's happening here. You've got 2 Asian men, Sikh men, in glasses and blue suits. I don't want to bully you.
No,
I'm just want to
I
ask,
shall get up and walk out.
do you feel slightly bullied by us?
No, I feel quite nervous because I'm not well read, but I don't feel I have to be well read on this subject.
I feel the responsibility as a Briton, as a British person, that we must view things honestly in the very recent past.
So you feel I've been dishonest?
I believe that you... OK, I'm going to put my niceties aside, and I'm going to say I think you have conveniently not sought objectivity. I think you've been dishonest with what the colonial past was like. If we can't be honest about Britain in India 100 years ago, then how can we be honest about how we view Britain in the future?
No. I think history is history, and you've got to accept that and not wallow in it. Good. No.
None of this is easy for anyone connected with this painful past. But en route to Wolverhampton, going home to see my mum, it strikes me there would be a simple way to break the deadlock. Britain should formally apologise for the Amritsar massacre of 1919. I think we've got a willful amnesia about empire, and an apology would just force us to confront some of the issues. The empire explains so much about our psychology and language and food, and I've discovered that empire was basically an exercise in institutionalized racism. And to realize that that was a case is quite a startling thing, isn't it? It fundamentally changes the way I see my country and my place in it. I don't think British people should walk around with a sense of shame every minute of their lives about what happened in their name. They weren't even there. But a bit of acknowledgement is a good thing, you know? I think an apology is a good beginning because it'll get people talking. You know, this is about now. It's about working out where we stand in relation to racism, where we stand in relation to India and our place in the world, and it'd be a very healthy thing to do. Just here, yeah.